I want you to say, it's like, all the protests, they're not saying lift the embargo, they're saying libertad, which is freedom.
Oh.
Okay. No, I just want to make the studio audience, I want to wake up the studio audience. There's a couple people back there that are asleep. Hello. There you go. All right, we're ready to roll.
Ooh-wee.
Okay, ready?
Let's go.
Here we
Rock
go.
and roll.
You give me the countdown? 9, 8, like NASA.
Lift off.
5, 4. Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to GBH Amplifies with Alberto Vasallo here at the Boston Public Library once again. And it's a pleasure to be here, especially with my friends from the Newsfeed Cafe. They provide a lot of good stuff. So let's get a round of applause for the Newsfeed Cafe. That's how you get free stuff. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, so I have been looking forward to this particular show for several months now. And let me explain. If you've been following our shows, Amplifies here with all the different hosts, the previous show we did was on Venezuela, what was going on with Venezuelans. Today's show is about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, which is Cuba, the island of Cuba, which is only 90 miles away, with an outside it's an outside story, okay? From the days of being one of the world's ultimate touristic spots, the echoes and obviously the echoes and the impact of the Cuban Revolution, to 13 days in the 1960s that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Cuba is a unique place where history, culture, and resiliency collides. Now, it's been shaped by decades of tension with the United States and other countries, and an exiled community that has flourished in South Florida and beyond. And it's become one of the most fascinating and complex societies in the world today. But today, we'll take a look at it through my panel, which is composed of Cuban Americans, some who were born in Cuba, others who are sons and daughters of Cuban Americans, of Cubans who have suffered. So without further ado, I want from left to right, I want you to look into the camera and just briefly introduce yourself and tell me about the book you bought and what you do.
I didn't buy it. I wrote it.
That you wrote.
My name is Ana Evera Flaster. I was born in Cuba. I left when I was 5, almost 6. And it was a very abrupt uprooting experience. And I try to capture what that was like in my book, Property of the Revolution, which I don't have a copy of, but I have this little card. The book came out last year in April, and it's the story, it's about what happens when you lose everything overnight, which is what happened to us. And as a child, how that impacted me for the rest of our lives. We ended up within weeks in Nashua, New Hampshire in a snowstorm and completely a fish out of water. So it's my attempt to capture the Cuban American experience, especially the far-flung Cuban Americans, the ones that ended up in Idaho or New Hampshire like us, and trying to set the record straight about our history.
Setting the record straight is something that this young lady has been doing on her Instagram. I suggest you follow her. She's passionate, very accurate, and she was born in Cuba. How long ago did you come to the United States?
I've been here 15 years and 4 years that I lived in Guyana, so altogether 19 years outside of Cuba.
Okay, so I want you to look at tell the audience what you do on social media and why it's important to you to, as Anna said, set the record straight as someone who was born in Cuba and now in the United States.
My name is Grecia Ordóñez. That's my social media as well. You can find me as Grecia Ordóñez on Instagram, TikTok, etc., etc. And other than make your day better, because that's what I do, I also set the record straight about Cuba and the reality of Cuba. And I touch on topics that could be considered taboo, like the sexual tourism, and other topics that they always want to sweep under the rug. But
Who is they?
Everybody that believes that Cuba is a paradise, everybody that believes that all the problems in Cuba are because of the embargo, everybody that believes that and that try to tell us Cuban how our experience should be and what we should feel and think, even though we are the ones born there, I'm referring to those people.
Okay, and we're going to get to that because we have a video that touches upon that, and who will be our 5th guest, but Cuban Mike.
Hey.
He has a show, okay? He combines entertainment with political commentary.
Yes.
So recently you had a Grammy Award-winning rapper.
Yeah.
but then also you had Cuban prisoners.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your story and why you're so passionate about Cuba.
Well, hello, my name is Michael Reyes, a.k.a. Cuban Mike. I host a radio show called The Tape Deck Hour. It's a hip-hop radio show, but I also touch base on what happens in Cuba. I also try to put things perspective from a black Cuban perspective, because it's like an undertow story on what happens in Cuba, especially to the black Cuban community. At the same time, I was able to have prominent activist folks such as Rosa Maria Paya. She has a documentary on HBO called Nights Not Eternal. Grammy Award-winning artist and funky for the song Pati Vida. Political prisoner by the name of Piche. He was the longest political active prison he had in Cuba, longest ever. During that time, you know, being a first generation, hearing my parents' story, just off the fact how they left Cuba, it's a movie within itself. So, you know, I'm able to lend my voice and hear other people's voices. And, you know, through my networking, I was able to have these fine human beings here on the show, and they were able to tell their story and their voices, and I do my part of serving the community to, you know, do my part.
Excellent. All right, Cuban Mike. From Cuban Mike, we're going to go to another author. We've got two authors here, right? And I actually saw a presentation recently that Jorge Lucas Alvarez Girardi did. He's a Cuban American researcher. He was born in the United States, lived in Venezuela, but then he became really interested in telling the Cuban American story. And you started to do some research on the Bay of Pigs. Okay, invasion, the Bay of Pigs, whatever you want to call it, the Bay of Pigs. He's written a book called, in English, it's called Green Like Palm, Red Like Blood, Bay of Pigs. Tell me a little bit about your story and what has made you so interested in that part of the Cuban history.
Yeah, well, my name is Jorge Lucas Alvarez. I was born in the United States from a Cuban father and a Venezuelan mother. But afterward, we live in Venezuela. I studied in Venezuela most of my life, but always related with the Cuban situation. And then, because of the situation in Venezuela, Maduro and everything, we migrated to the United States, to Miami in particular, and now to Boston. I decided, when I moved, my wife is Venezuelan, so I tried to explain her the situation of the Cubans and how they wanted to liberate their country, and that's when I started to research about Bay of Pigs. And when I was investigating and researching, I knew a lot of people that knew my father, and my father afterward gave of those people that eventually went to Venezuela, he gave them work in his company in Venezuela. So it's like more or less a legacy for my father. It's also a legacy for the people that fought in the Bay of Pigs and lost.
Okay, these are the ones that we have physically here. We have one more guest, and we're going to cue the video. Cesar Perez is a teacher of history here locally. He also, well, he was born in Cuba too. For 29 years, he wanted to be a journalist in Cuba, could not really do it, as we all know, or if you don't know, there's a problem with freedom of press in Cuba. So here is his kind of take on the panel today. I want us to watch it because I'm going to ask each one of you your reaction to maybe something he says that you can each key upon. So here's Cesar Perez.
Cuban government throughout its like almost 7 decades of history has not been very effective in providing basic needs to the Cuban population, but they have been incredibly effective in creating a body of propaganda that has been repeated all over the world and that many people still in 2026 still believe. As a Cuban in the United States, especially a Cuban in academia, you are constantly faced with people who want to explain Cuba to you. So Cuba explaining is a big deal in academia, and I had that in every sort of environments. I got that in conferences, I got that in private parties, where people would come to me and told me, no, what you're saying is not true because I was there for a week in 1996 and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's really difficult to explain. It's a systemic lack of freedom. And when I mean systemic, means that you don't have freedom of expression, you don't have freedom of association, you don't have the freedom to start a business, so you don't have economic freedom, you don't have the freedom to leave the country when you want, you cannot express yourself politically in any way. In the last few years, when the situation has become even more dire, you would expect that the government would like loosen up a little bit on the freedom of expression, like allow people like a little of skin, like for them to express that, but it's the opposite. Since they had like these massive demonstrations in 2021, the repression has only increased. And about, freedom of expression in Cuba, there's zero, none. Ideas that people have about Cuba have been informed by propaganda, have been informed by the academia, have been informed by the media, have been informed by Hollywood. It's like Cuba is not a real country to most people in the world. Cuba is a dream. Blaming Trump on Cuba's and blaming Cuba's ills on Trump is absolutely ridiculous. Cuba has been there forever. Cuba has been in a horrible situation forever. Cuba has right now more than 1,000 political prisoners, many of them for peacefully demonstrating against the government, especially the ones that demonstrated throughout the country in 2021. And nobody talks about these people. People go to Cuba to show, like the recent flotilla and all that, they go to Cuba to show support to the Cuban regime, not to the Cuban people. The Cuban people and the Cuban regime are two separate, and actually they are antagonistic entities. So if you want to show support to the Cuban people, show support for a change of regime in Cuba. That's the only thing that can solve Cuban problems.
Now go to somebody who lived it, okay, of the panel here recently. You came here 15 years. What resonates for you when you hear what Cesar had to say? What different points?
No, he's right on everything he stated. Cuba is like stuck in time. You hear people from generations back, and they're speaking about the same lack that the current people are speaking about. It's been in lack for decades. So blaming what's going on in Cuba right now on the current administration is complete. I cannot.
You can't swear, but you can call it.
It's not okay, because it's 67 years of lack of free press, 67 years of lack of free speech, 67 years of not voting. We do not have, people understand that part, that we do not vote for our elected officials. There is not elected officials. They just place them. The people have no say. So, you cannot blame that on the current administration. So I really agree with what he was saying.
Okay. What for you? What something that Cesar said?
I think I found a new word there when he talked about people that are not from Cuba, explain what situation goes on in Cuba. I think the word for it could be, how people say mansplaining. I think the word for it is Cubansplaining.
Yeah.
Cubansplaining. Cubansplaining, right?
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Cubansplaining. You got a bunch of non-Cubans telling our story, so that's the part that gets frustrated. That's one of the main reasons why I do my show. One of the things that I want to piggyback that Gracia said, besides not having freedom of speech, no real elections, there's the urban legend, not even urban legend, it's the truth, the local neighborhood snitch. So if you don't even do what you're told there, you got the neighborhood snitch telling the cops this person is not doing what they're supposed to do.
So she lived it. What is the official name of that organization?
CDR.
Yeah.
CDR, CDR.
Comité
de Defensa Revolucionaria.
Committee for the
Revolutionary Defense.
Yeah. So it is a neighborhood watch.
Worse.
They don't look for crime. What they do is for dissenters and for people who are against the government.
They don't look for crime, but they look, if you have, I believe it's so bad. It's so bad with the CDR. We can talk so much about it. But they will spy on you if you have visitors from overseas, because you're supposed to report whoever comes to visit you from overseas, and if you don't, they will tell on you to the police. If you're selling anything illegal, but everything in Cuba is in the black market, so if you're selling everything illegal, they will tell on you. If you are even listening to, back in the days, you couldn't even listen to Celia Cruz or the Beatles. If they hear that music in your house, they will report you to the police. So things like that people don't really be talking about much. But yes, CDR is evil.
Glad you pointed that out. Okay, what did you get from what he said? Anything?
Well, it's more or less the same thing. My father's family were from there, and some decided to stay in Cuba at the moment of the revolution, and some came to Miami after the revolution. But the one that stayed, they were like niched by the own family. They're trying to get favors from the government, and one of them denounced his aunt that she had jewelry hidden, so he could stay in her house. So they took her house And they don't give it to him, they give it to another official, but that's how they got into the system, but of people saying things about the others, and most of the time inventing things about the others to get favors.
Yep. You as an author, and you talk about, because you mentioned it earlier, right? The narrative. He mentioned academia.
Yeah.
You know, said how academia has really kind of been one-sided, right? And obviously more sympathetic towards the Cuban regime for all these years. A lot of kids nowadays embrace socialism. They think it's better than capitalism, right?
Yeah.
What's your response to that, or have you had to do that a lot in your travels?
The Cuba splaining is absolutely correct, and it comes, I think, from through education. Our story has been told in a way that isn't accurate, and I've wondered why. How could we have such different versions and visions of what is happening in Cuba? And I think it stems from, in the 60s, while there were anti-war demonstrations and riots and the young were rebelling, the Cuban Revolution happens, and the young really associated with those young rebels. Che Guevara was,
Yes.
and they freed the oppressed people of Cuba, and so they and the propaganda that they spun was always excellent, and that's the story that got conveyed to the young people, and then they became professors, and then they taught generations of students who think that the Cuban people wanted a communist revolution. That's not what they wanted. They wanted the restoration of the 1940 Democratic Constitution. The rebels all promised that they would restore the Democratic Constitution, they would have free elections, and fair elections. That never happened. But I think that that Cesar really hits on it, where he mentions propaganda. The regime has been excellent about spinning propaganda, including propaganda that shuts us out,
Yes.
us as Cuban Americans, because the story is we're all rich Cubans who just have a chip on our shoulder.
Yes.
We hate the regime because we want our plantations and our banks back. My father was a forklift driver. I don't know any fancy Cubans.
I wish my father had money when he was in
Thank you.
Cuba.
No, thank you for bringing
He
that
didn't bring
up.
nothing back.
Thank you for bringing.
They sold a romantic version of the revolution,
Right.
and everybody in Latin America and everybody most in the world got that romanticized version. That at the end, and Che Guevara was one of the worst of the killing people. They killed everybody they felt that was in opposition one way or another. So they were more like assassins than a revolution.
All right, so I saw look, I'm glad you guys are excited. I want to give you this opportunity because this demystify, right? We all in our individual journeys have had this, right? Trying to correct people who have what we consider as Cubans, a narrative about Cuba. What are the things that upset you, or that you really find yourself constantly talking to somebody could be from another Latin American country.
Yeah.
It could be somebody from academia. It could be somebody who doesn't understand. What are the things that frustrate you about what they say about Cuba that you know is not true?
Okay, so one of the things, and I know I have to bring the race talk into it because it is so prevalent. One of the
I got
things
your back.
that.
Don't worry, I got your back. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I got your
Thank
back
you.
too.
Thanks. One of the things that upset me the most is the narrative that blacks in Cuba were nothing before the revolution, and that the revolution was what made us and educate us. That is a blatant lie. That is a lie. I come from a family, my great-grandfather, my grandfather's dad, he was a landlord. He had 17 properties. So we were in the real estate business. We were already on the way to generational wealth. And when Fidel Castro took power, it ceased because private property ceased to exist when he took power. He took all of my family properties. Homelessness. There were a lot of things that happened in my family, from depression to alcoholism to hurting themselves due to having all of these things taken from them. And there was a lot of educated blacks in Cuba before the revolution, what we call la robo-ilusión, because it robbed us from everything we had. So that's one of the biggest lies and the things that upset me the most, that they say that the revolution made the black Cubans. That's a lie.
You want to piggyback on that?
Yes, I want to piggyback on that. As she was saying, I'll tell a quick story. My grandfather, he had a bachelor's degree in art and design, and he left with that with Cuba when he couldn't leave with nothing, with no luggage or anything like that. So again, that's also blatant lies. I also understand that Cuba did a wonderful job selling propaganda. You got to understand, with Castro, he fought, to fight apartheid in Africa. He went to Harlem with Malcolm, so I get that part. But while he was doing all these wonderful things to the outsides of the world, he was torturing black Cubans. You understand? We think we're the most in the firing squad, most taken to jail. We had a lot of social organizations, Pan-Africanism, and he took that all away. So that's
They don't speak about the story of the Black Panthers that went to Cuba and then they had to flee to Spain and Europe. They don't.
yeah.
They don't talk about that
They don't
part
talk about that.
because when they encountered the truth of what was really going on in Cuba, they were not okay with it.
Yeah.
So this is not one of the pride of the Black Panthers was their afro, and was one of the first things that Fidel said, you guys got to cut your hair, because over here is everybody the same, and this is what we do, and we don't show pride. Why wouldn't you show pride? In who you are and what you are. That's your crown, So a lot of them left. They left Cuba and they went to Europe and stuff like that. So people just need to educate themselves.
You guys, some of the stuff that you've had that has bothered you the most about what people think or don't know about Cuba.
I have to just add something to what Mike said about the societies, las sociedades. The black Cuban community had these social clubs that lent money to each other, that helped, that mentored people, mentored Cubans and black Cubans. And there's a woman at the University of Pennsylvania, a Cuban American woman, Amalia Dash. She's doing the history of the black Cubans before the revolution. They made up 30% of the voting population. They were
They had a voice.
organized. They were organized. They were incredibly successful. But then, after the revolution, Fidel said, no, there's no more racism. We've taken care of it. So the societies have to end. And they disbanded those societies and ended all that institutional knowledge.
But then they pushed us. They pushed us to the more marginalized neighborhoods and things like that. And like you say, they used to have balls. My grandmother showed me the pictures of the ballrooms.
Dancing balls, yeah.
Like it was with like a live orchestra. My grandmother was one of the dancers, so she was known for that. And they used to hire her to go dance in the ballrooms and stuff like that. Every time there was like a society event, it used to go the high society for blacks in Cuba.
Jorge, some of your issues with other people.
Well, for what I know from my family over there, they were very more or less integrated. They were Cuba was very modern at the time in comparing it to other countries in Latin America, even Brazil or even in Venezuela at the end of the 19th century, beginning the 20th century more or less. And that everything went down with the system, with the government, and of course, one of the reasons that Cesar said, that the government always has a way to manipulate things to point another person responsibly, and another institution, and example, the United States.
All right, so yeah, he's got a perfect segue to the video that we have queued up in a little bit, but we want to add something before
I just want to say that that's part of the myth of Cuba, that we were a poor country and that we're so advanced now thanks to the revolution, when in fact Cuba was second, third, fourth in most economic development categories in the 50s. The revolution inherited a very strong economy. We had a per capita GDP equivalent to some southern European countries. We had, hospital beds per capita, number of television and radio stations. There was imbalance between rural and city, as there would be even today, in any country. So that's one of the major myths.
Yep. So I'm going to come back to you. Of the Cuban government has been very good at blaming everybody, but the government
themselves.
Because how many have you heard the term embargo? Right, Lauren? Have you heard embargo? The term embargo, the embargo. Mm-hmm. How well do you know about the embargo, Lauren? 1 to 10. Not a lot. Okay. Mm-hmm. So let's hear what Cesar Perez has to say about the embargo on Cuba, and then I want to get the reaction from you, Cuban Americans, on what Cesar says about the embargo, because that's what everybody's talking about now with Trump, the embargo and the blockade. Right. Here we go.
The embargo, that is like the biggest excuse for all the shortages, for all the failures of the Cuban economic policies. The embargo has been in place since 1962. During that time, in the first 30 years of the embargo, right, from 1960 roughly to 1990, Cuba received subsidies by the USSR that absolutely dwarfed, and this is just, I want you to keep this in mind, the subsidies that Cuba received from the USSR were several times in levels of magnitude higher than the Marshall Plan, higher than the assistance of the United States to Japan for the reconstruction after World War II. But the Cuban economy is in free fall since 1991, and the Cuban economy, way before Trump announced his latest measures, and way before Trump cut off the link with Venezuela, etc., the Cuban economy was in absolute shambles, and the government has responded only with repression. So this is the actual cause, the actual root cause of all Cuban problems, and has been studied by serious economists for decades. Is not the embargo, is the failed policies of the Cuban regime.
I want to come to you because I've seen your videos and you have said many times what he just said.
Yeah.
The embargo. You actually came up with something that you said in the protests. What do they scream? What do they say and what do they not say?
Right. And every time the Cuban people takes the street and protest, it never says, down with the embargo. It says freedom. Freedom, libertad. That's what the Cuban people are asking for. And I think the whole embargo is a whole excuse because, again, there is no policies when it comes to medication, food, which is what what people will say that Cuba needs. There is no policies when it comes to that yet. All the help that gets to Cuba from Mexico, from Venezuela, from here, it gets resold. They receive it as donations and they resell it to the people in Cuba. They put it in this code that they call modulos packages, and they resell it. If it was a help, a donation to give to the people for free, why are you selling it to the people? The embargo is internal. The embargo is caused by their own dictatorship. That's what the real embargo is.
Reactions.
No, go ahead.
And even, I mean, if we want to go deeper in that, there's no real embargo, real blockade. Cuba trades with over 100 countries. Even with us, we import at least 1.5 billion in export and 1.3 in import. We give them at least 300 million worth of food and medicine. But like Gracia said, we give them what they need and then they resell it to the people. So there's no real embargo in that department. And plus, Cuba, they ask for money, they ask loans to other countries or whatever the case may be, but since they don't produce anything, all they said is borrow, give me loans, give me loans.
They're all pretty much bankrupt because they owe.
In all
Yes,
these
so
countries.
what they really crying about is because they don't pay back, como decimos en Cuba, son mala paga.
Yep.
Yeah.
They don't pay back.
The
So-
government
and it's
owes-
like,
the government of Cuba. Let's kind of call. What you're talking about is the government of Cuba, who is in debt with so many different countries because they've been borrowing, and have no way to pay back.
and it just have the hand like this, just asking with no way to pay because you destroy all of your industries.
Yep.
You don't produce.
The main thing is they don't pay. It's basically, Americans don't understand this too, that it's basically one employer, the government, sets the salaries. They pay a pittance. So you don't have an incentive to work. So what happens? Your productivity dives. And then you lose all this productivity. Cuba before the revolution, Cuba was always had a trade surplus. They always exported more than they imported. That's how productive it was. Now it's the opposite, right? It has to import. Used to do 80% of the food produced was exported, and 20% was kept. Now they have to import 80% of the food.
I have one thing, for example, in the case of Venezuela and Cuba, since Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela, he started to export to Cuba oil. And although he exported a lot of oil until recently, there was always a shortage of electricity oil in Cuba,
Yes.
because Cuba became the biggest exporter of oil that they don't produce. So all the oil that came, that they resold to other countries and not necessarily stayed to the Cuban people.
They estimate 60% of the oil that Venezuela sold Cuba at a discount. the regime sold on the international market and benefited, supposedly to reinvest in infrastructure. But Cubans have been asking, well, where is it? Where is
Where's
any
the
sign of
infrastructure?
it?
Maybe
Yeah.
in
their pocket.
tourism resorts and that type of stuff, and with their own families, but not in infrastructure for the people.
All right. For those who don't know a little bit of history, I'm going to go to Jorge on this because I did hear you do this presentation. For those who say, well, why is Trump now doing what other presidents had not done before, right? Because Trump is the one driving, well, it's economy. And there is a story in the USA Today of this week saying that the Pentagon is getting ready for a military operation in Cuba for regime change, right? That's what they want. Marco Rubio has said it, Secretary of State, that the ultimate goal is regime change, not to have them stay in power. Now, for those who don't know why the United States has not done this before, you mentioned it at your presentation. The missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, has a lot to do with why Cuba has been allowed to have that communist influence 90 miles away from Miami.
Yeah,
Could you explain to the people?
Yeah, of course. At the end, in the 13th day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy made a secret deal with Nikita Khrushchev at the time, that if he retires the missiles from Cuba, he won't attack. The United States won't attack or invade Cuba in any kind. Of course, he will also he will eliminate some missiles from Turkey that he was already going to do. But that was a promise that was made, and every president from there till now have respected that promise that the United States won't invade or try to invade the island. Trump is trying to do different kind of things, not invading, is pressuring the government to, or the people in Cuba to express themselves to overthrow the government. That's what his intention is for now. Let's see what happens at the end.
Okay. So in the time that we have left, because we've talked a little bit, I want to make sure that you get everything off your chest. Anything that I have not touched upon
Gaesa.
that you want. Yes.
Gaesa. We didn't mention Gaesa. Americans don't realize that the military in Cuba runs an estimated 60 to 75% of the economy, including a significant, if not all, of tourism.
Tourism, yes.
The gasoline stations, the retail stores, and are probably linked to some of these these companies that exist abroad, that any Cuban in the diaspora can go online, order something for a relative in Havana, and it appears there in 48 hours. And so where's the embargo, if that can happen? And those are products that, if that arrives in 48 hours at your relative's doorstep, those products are in Cuba. But it's products that no Cuban can find, because that's how tightly controlled the economy is. They're enriching themselves, and they're not allowing average Cubans to have their own businesses. Cubans can't even fish in an island. How many Cubans do you know who haven't had fresh fish?
Oh, no.
Or own a boat.
No,
Or you can't go on a boat either.
my grandmother don't know what a lobster is, and we live in an island, and what a lobster is for plus 30
So
plus years.
Cuba is an island surrounded by water, and
where the people has no fish.
and the people have no food.
And if you fish illegally, because they consider it illegal, they take it, they seize your fish, and you can face jail time.
How about the cows? I've heard a lot about
Oh,
the cows.
I know people in Cuba that's still in
You
jail
gotta hear
because
this.
of the
So
cows.
If you don't know what the cow, Sandra, listen to this about the cows in Cuba. Tell me a little bit about how sacred cows are in Cuba.
It's more sacred than India. You should have an altar for cows in Cuba. You are not allowed to slaughter and consume your own, even if you're a farmer. You're not allowed to do that because you can go to jail.
Why? Because of the scarcity.
Because the scarcity, and because they want to control everything. They want to have a monopoly on everything. I know people that are still facing time in jail because of cow.
The farmer has to give fill the quota that the state demands at the prices that the state says it
Right.
will pay, and then a few are allowed to sell it on the open market. A few, not all. And the problem is, the Cuban, not only is it a low rate, but then the state doesn't pay the farmer.
Right. And it's not just with the cows, it's with everything. If you're a farmer and you cultivate potatoes, tomatoes, coconuts, mangoes. You cannot sell it. You cannot have like a farmer's market here
I was talking to Lauren about
or a
that. Yep.
stand outside of your farm and just sell to them. You cannot do that. You have to sell it to, you have to call them, sell it to whatever price they want to pay for, and then they do whatever they feel with it.
That's more or less like the feudalism style, that the state controls everything and they let you live in their place, and you have to pay for the privilege to live there
Yeah.
with your work.
Yeah, because that is another myth that I always hear. Well, healthcare is free, but comes with this. Education is free, but they don't tell you the rest of the story, which I was
Right.
explaining to Lauren a little bit.
People hear that word free and they get a little bit too happy, not knowing that it's not really free. It comes with a lot of consequences in the end.
Exactly.
You're paying with your soul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You're signing your soul to the devil
Yeah.
for those free stuff.
yeah.
Well,
and
they
it's not really,
promised
yeah,
that,
free.
that they would have equality and that they would have, everyone would be the same. But everyone is the same now in poverty. And they've lost their freedoms. So it was a bad deal. The only people who've done well are the people in the political and military elites, the ones that believe and show their belief to this ideology.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
So I've seen some songs in the Cuban exile community, very popular, talking about a bridge from Havana to Miami, about seeing a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Starbucks, and some Americans go, oh, no, 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 don't ruin what it. How do you react to that?
This is like, they look at Cuba as this charming place because it's falling apart and people are so happy. Oh, they dance. No, the people are amazing survivors, but they did not choose that system that has kept them poor. So it's not charming to Cubans to not have water and not have food and have homes falling apart.
Exactly.
It's not charming. And they would take a McDonald's and they will take foreign investment, which is happening now, but it's investing through the regime. And it's not getting to the people. So the French and the Spanish and the Japanese and everybody else who has investments in Cuba are dealing, they have to deal with
The
the
Canadians,
regime.
important to mention the
With the
Canadians.
regime.
Like when they exported medical care outside their country. So the doctors don't have a big wage in Cuba. They're very small compared to everybody else, although you have to study a lot. But when you go outside, they pay you a little bit, but the state collects every dollar.
So let's
around
explain that.
$10,000 per month,
yeah.
and they pay you around $120.
Let's
So
break it down.
goes to the States.
In pesos. I
pesos, I'm sorry,
I
yeah.
do want to break that economic model very simply because I don't know if that goes over Sandra's head, Lauren's head, some of the audience. So this is what happens, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong. Cuba educates all of these doctors, right, for free. The doctor doesn't pay. But then what they say to the doctor is, you are now have to go to Brazil. They had a contract with Brazil, or Jamaica, or Haiti, or any one of these countries.
You belong to us.
But you belong to us because we gave you the education. So you are property of the state, right?
Yes, sir.
Then they go to Brazil and they say to Brazil, you're gonna pay us $50,000 a year for this doctor to the Cuban government. Of that $50,000, the Cuban government then pays the doctor how much?
Less than 1%.
Less than
Or
1%.
10%. It can vary
10%.
depending.
Very dependent on the country.
So their export is these doctors that they educate, but then what happens? These are the best doctors, and where are they? They're not in the country.
No,
They're
my
outside.
brother is one of those doctors. He currently lives in Miami. And yeah, it's modern day slavery.
They
That's
take
what
their
it is.
passports.
Modern day slavery?
They take their passports, so they are undocumented, so they cannot leave freely.
And before people think that we're just a bunch of crazy Cubans, because that's how we sound sometimes when we're trying to set the record straight, the New York Times did a pretty good job of collecting testimonies from doctors who have defected on these missions. So if anyone's curious, they should check out their series on that. They a year ago, 2 years ago, capturing from the first-person accounts of what that was like to be on those missions. Some of them were forced to go door to door in Venezuela and tell people in their white coats that if they didn't vote for Maduro, they would not be able to take care of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's the true meaning of being Properties of the Revolution.
Property in my book.
I did that?
Yeah. Nice, nice. Good plug.
Yeah. So again, this is the stuff I know we're trying to simplify it, but it is complex.
Yeah, it is
and
very.
probably very difficult for Americans who have so much. We take so much for it, and I think you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but this is for my non-Cuban, non-Latinos. That is why Cubans love America so much. Let's be honest. Cuban Americans tend to be one of the biggest defenders of the United States.
Big
Almost
voters.
Very big voter.
The
very
percentage
patriotic.
of Cuban Americans.
See, it
who vote is
allow,
very
in my
high.
case, it allowed me to do and express myself with such a freedom. I would be in jail in my country. I mean, I'm not even allowed back. I cannot go back. If I step foot in Cuban airport, I go straight to jail just because of the way I speak and the things I say and the things I expose. So of course I love this country. I'm free here.
And
They are living the great American dream. They have liberty, they have a freedom of speech, they have everything that Cuba doesn't have right now.
And I will say this before anything else because I would be remiss. I'm very optimistic, but at the same time, it's a little bit become a little bit of a Debbie Downer because I know for a fact there are people that are with us that want us to be liberated, that want us to be free, and want us to, win this fight. But at the same time, it's very interesting because doing my research and due diligence, I find it very interesting that we tell these stories. I mean, for the ones that don't know the stories, but we don't mind, sharing our stories and educating y'all. But there are people that know the story, that know what's going on, and they still decide to support the regime. You could look at it from the United Nations. Like, how the heck is Cuba involved with the Human Resources Council?
How is it?
How are they?
Well, let's go.
You promote, free healthcare, and you got a movie called Sicko promoting like the healthcare in Cuba.
Well, let's go
in
locally.
Hollywood.
Let's go locally. Locally, do you have issues with the majority of our local Democratic leaders? Who come out?
Yes.
You have issues.
Yes, I do.
You have issues.
Yes, big
You have issues.
Yeah,
I have issues.
my main question is, when we have representatives who were democratically elected here, and they travel to Cuba, why are they not meeting with the families of political prisoners? And why, and this is a key point, why is it okay for Cubans to live in a way that they themselves would never tolerate? They would never accept the kind of repression that Cubans face for speaking out, writing, just getting on Facebook and saying something against the criticizing the regime. Why is it okay for Cubans to live that way, but they wouldn't tolerate it? How can they defend that?
It's very easy to be a defender or defend that dictatorship when you get to go back home and you get to tweet from a Starbucks with some dollars in your bank account. It's very easy, but when you're there and you're suffering what's going on there, and then they say, oh, that's not, which happened with this last caravan. Oh, I'm still mad about that. This last caravan that went to Cuba with the little,
Flotillas?
with the little Guevara t-shirts and stuff. Hey, all cute and stuff. They, oh my God, I'm trying to.
I know.
So they go to Cuba, right? They do all these things. The people never benefited for what they did. It was just a circus and a propaganda and just making it look cute for the Cuban people. And then they come here and they say, oh, that's not the impression I got from the Cuban people over there. Because they can't speak, if not they go to jail.
And also
Of course you're not going to get what they really want to tell
They're
you.
also part of the propaganda also, so we all know who's behind the scenes in that department. So it's like they're being told and being paid what to do and say to influence the people that don't know what's going on.
They stayed at the five-star hotels.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Their hotels, by the way, which are run by the military, didn't lose power.
Exactly.
Well-
And the whole city around the hotel was dark, and the only place that had power was the hotel where they were staying.
Yeah.
Code Pink.
Yeah. We can go on to talk about the Cuban situation for hours. It is a fascinating, very complex. I wanted to do this show, and I want to be very transparent about it, because I have seen in media outlets, including this one, that I'm given a platform opportunity, the other side. We have felt that our side and what you heard today has not been the subject of enough outlets, whether here or across the United States. Am I speaking out of school?
Absolutely.
No, you're right.
You're
You're right.
So for those who may be saying, well, why don't you have somebody else on the show? because GBH has always had people from the other side of the show, and I appreciate them giving me the opportunity to tell the other side. That's what amplifies GBH, makes this a great show and a great platform. GBH is helping to amplify your voices that don't usually go with the narrative that you hear up here in Boston, Massachusetts,
Yeah.
because that's the way it is. If it was Florida, it'd be different.
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah.
So I appreciate GBH Amplifies. I appreciate Lauren and Sandra giving you guys the opportunity
Thank
to tell
you.
a story that hasn't been told enough here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are done with another great show. Thank you again to the Wisdom Newsfeed Cafe. Muchas gracias, Newsfeed Cafe. Woo! Muchas gracias. Our security over there, my man, keeping us safe over here on the right, making sure. And of course, Lauren and Sandra. Come on, keep them going. Juan Jose.
Yes, yes, yes.
And what my favorite, what's her name, my favorite? Maddie. Maddie, but then Steve is back there too. Shout out to Steve, my boy Steve, and Maddie, who I love Maddie. She did not share her sandwich with me, though. She is a capitalist. She is not a communist. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mike. Cuba, Mike. Gracias.
you.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And see you next month. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.